Somewhere in a lab in Beijing, a chip just did something that should not be possible with today's hardware. It looked at a scan of a human brain, one of the most complicated shapes in the known universe, folded and creased in on itself billions of times over, and it rebuilt that entire structure in under half a second. Not minutes, not seconds, under half a second. And when researchers put it head-to-head against Nvidia's A100, one of the GPUs that powered the last generation of the AI boom, the new chip finished the same task up to 478 times faster. 478. That number sounds almost fake, like a typo that nobody caught before publication. But this was not a press release. It was published on July 3rd, 2026, in the journal Science, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed scientific journals on Earth. A team from Peking University and the Chinese Academy of Sciences did not just build a faster processor. They built a chip that computes the way a brain actually computes, by turning what engineers have spent decades trying to eliminate into the exact feature that makes it work. So what did they actually build? What is the catch buried inside that headline number? And does this mean Nvidia should be worried? Let's get into it.
To understand why this chip is such a big deal, you first need to understand a problem baked into almost every computer ever built, called the von Neumann bottleneck. In a traditional chip, there are two separate places where work happens. One area stores data, the memory. Another area processes that data, the processor. Every single calculation means shuttling information back and forth between those two places, over and over again, billions of times per second. Think of it like a chef who has to run to a separate warehouse across the street every time they need a single ingredient, instead of just reaching into a cabinet beside the stove. Even if the chef is incredibly fast, all that running back and forth eats up time and energy that has nothing to do with the actual cooking. This is exactly the problem that shows up when you try to model something like the human brain. The brain's outer layer, the cortex, is folded into an almost unbelievably complex, wrinkled surface, and mapping that surface computationally means moving enormous amounts of data back and forth constantly between memory and processor. Even a powerful GPU like the A100 spends much of its time simply moving information around rather than crunching it. The Peking University and Chinese Academy of Sciences team looked at this bottleneck and asked a different question. What if the chip didn't need to move the data at all? What if memory and computation could just happen in the exact same physical place?
The heart of this new chip is a component called a phase change memristor, a type of next-generation memory device that can store data and perform calculations in the very same physical location, rather than shipping information back and forth like a traditional chip. That alone is a meaningful engineering achievement. But the real twist in this story is what the team did with a known defect in these devices, something called conductance drift. Inside a memristor, tiny physical defects can shift position or structure over time, causing the electrical value stored in that cell to slowly change. For years, engineers treated this as a flaw, something that made memristors unreliable for precise, stable memory storage. The Peking University team looked at that same instability and saw an opportunity instead of a problem. Two researchers from Germany's Jülich Research Center, who were not involved in the study, described the approach in a companion commentary published alongside the paper. They compared it to refining crude oil directly at the oil field, rather than shipping the crude oil to a distant factory first. Instead of fighting conductance drift, the team used its natural, ever-shifting behavior to directly simulate the way real neurons change their state over time. The chip's own physical imperfection became the mechanism doing the brain modeling. That is a genuinely elegant piece of engineering, turning weakness into function rather than trying to eliminate it.
Built using a relatively modest 40-nanometer manufacturing process, which is far from the cutting-edge node sizes chip makers usually chase, this chip was designed for one very specific and very demanding task: reconstructing the folded surface of the human cerebral cortex in real time. This is not a general-purpose processor meant to run everyday software.
It is a specialized accelerator built for one job, mapping incredibly complex, curved biological surfaces the way the brain itself is shaped. According to the published results, the chip completed this reconstruction with a latency of about 2.12 milliseconds, and depending on the exact scenario tested, it beat Nvidia's A100 GPU by a factor ranging from 50 times to as much as 478 times. Lead researcher Yang-Yu Chao, a professor at Peking University School of Integrated Circuits, along with co-researcher Songji Tang from the Shanghai Institute of Microsystem and Information Technology, explained that the platform is designed to eventually support something called digital brain twins, highly detailed virtual models of an individual patient's brain that doctors could use to plan surgeries or study disease progression before ever touching a real patient. Now, here is the part responsible coverage of this story has to include, because the 478 times figure, while real, is easy to misread. The comparison was made against Nvidia's A100, a GPU that launched back in 2020. Nvidia has released 2 full hardware generations since then, moving through Hopper and into the current Blackwell architecture, both of which are dramatically faster than the A100 on general workloads. So this was not a test against Nvidia's best available hardware today. It was a comparison against an older chip on one narrow, highly specialized task, brain surface reconstruction, not general computing of any kind. This is a task-specific accelerator, built to do one very particular job extremely well, not a general replacement for the kind of GPU that trains large language models or renders video games. None of that erases the achievement. A dedicated, purpose-built chip beating a general-purpose GPU by orders of magnitude on its home turf is still a legitimate engineering result. But it is a fundamentally different claim than an all-purpose Nvidia killer, and the difference matters if you actually want to understand what this chip can and cannot do.
The reason this specific, narrow task matters so much comes down to where it is meant to be used: inside hospitals, not inside data centers. Reconstructing the brain's folded cortical surface accurately and quickly has direct clinical value. In neurosurgery, doctors sometimes need real-time, high-precision mapping of brain structures to guide extremely delicate procedures where even small delays or inaccuracies carry real risk. In early Alzheimer screening, subtle changes in cortical folding patterns can appear years before obvious symptoms show up, and faster, more accessible processing could make that kind of early screening more practical to run at scale in ordinary hospital settings rather than specialized research centers. Brain-computer interfaces, devices that translate neural activity into digital signals, also depend heavily on fast, low-latency processing of exactly this kind of complex neural data. Researchers are already framing this as a foundational technology for a global brain-computer interface market some analysts project could be worth roughly $145 billion by 2040. That is the real strategic bet here, not replacing Nvidia in AI data centers, but capturing an early, durable foothold inside a fast-growing medical technology market.
Zoom out, and this chip is not an isolated story. It is part of a broader shift happening across China's semiconductor research over the past year. A shift away from chasing smaller transistors on the same silicon path everyone else is racing down, and toward entirely different chip architectures that sidestep the equipment restrictions the United States has placed on advanced silicon manufacturing tools. This neuromorphic chip does not require cutting-edge extreme ultraviolet lithography machines to produce, since it was built on a comparatively mature 40-nanometer process, the kind of manufacturing capability China already possesses domestically. That is a meaningful detail. If the next wave of computing breakthroughs comes from clever new chip architectures rather than simply shrinking silicon further and further, then the export restrictions built around denying access to the most advanced lithography tools become far less effective at slowing China down. This is exactly the kind of workaround Chinese researchers appear to be pursuing across multiple fronts at once. Not one silver bullet, but a pattern of finding entirely new physical mechanisms for computing that do not depend on the tools they cannot easily access.
This is a peer-reviewed result, published in one of the most respected scientific journals in the world, which gives it real credibility that many chip announcements never earn. But turning a laboratory demonstration into a widely used clinical or commercial product is still a long journey. The chip needs to be manufactured consistently at meaningful volume, not just as a handful of research samples built under careful lab conditions. It needs regulatory approval before it can be used in real hospital settings, particularly for anything touching neurosurgery or diagnostic decision-making. And medical device approval processes move slowly and carefully for good reason. It needs integration into existing hospital imaging and diagnostic systems, which were not designed around this kind of specialized hardware. And it needs independent replication by other research groups outside the original team, the normal process by which extraordinary scientific claims get tested and confirmed over time. None of these hurdles diminish what was actually demonstrated here. They simply mark the distance between an impressive peer-reviewed paper and a device sitting inside a hospital down the street from you.
So here's the real question worth sitting with. Is the future of computing going to keep being about who can pack the most transistors onto a single piece of silicon? Or is it going to be about who finds the cleverest way to make computation happen at all, even inside a chip's own physical flaws? China just showed one very compelling answer to that question, built not by beating silicon at its own game, but by refusing to play that game in the first place. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want more grounded breakdowns of the real engineering breakthroughs coming out of China's chip and AI industry, subscribe, because this story is only getting started.